Welcome back, everybody. It's Zach here, bringing you guys another fantasy football video. So I'm going over 9 players that I think are going to be legitimate league winners for you guys this season. These are guys that I think have a very real opportunity to significantly outperform their ADP and be guys that are going to make a real difference for you guys. So not guys that are going to be finishing at 25 overall at their position, being drafted 40th or whatever. These are guys that I think have a legitimate opportunity to potentially be guys that are week in, week out dominators for your roster and actually be the kind of guys that you view as like a staple of your roster, and will look back on the year and say, hey, these are the guys that are the reason why I won my fantasy championship last season. Because as great as it is to hit on those values, get guys that finish 30th when you draft them 45th or whatever, those aren't the guys that are going to move the needle for you in your fantasy league. The guys that move the needle are the guys that lap the field, the Christian McCaffreys last year, the CeeDee Lambs last year, guys that are drafted 30th overall that finish 6th at their position, the guys that are very significantly outperforming their ADP and are actually finishing inside the top 10 at their position, being guys that can actually dominate for you. So those are the guys that I'm talking about in this video. I'm trying to highlight guys at each position. So we've got 1 quarterback, 3 receivers, 3 running backs, and 2 tight ends we'll talk about. If there are any other guys that I didn't mention that you feel like should have been on this list, feel free to let me know as well. I'll be happy to give you guys my opinions on all of those guys. As well, my full draft kit will be going up on my website on August 1st, so stay tuned for that. It'll be free for all of you guys. You can just take a look at it. It'll highlight my guys, breakouts, values, busts, league winners, all that. It's going to be a lot of fun. It's the first draft kit I've ever put together. It's already like 13 pages long. I'm still trying to finish it up, so slaving away at it. But I wanted to put one together and just see if you guys like it. So please do take a look at that. Like I said, it'll be free, and I highly recommend it. And hopefully it's useful for you guys as well. So yeah. Super fun making this video again. Just super excited about it, and we're really getting into things. It's July 29th right now when I'm recording this, and we're going to have a lot more content going forward, and we're getting really close to football. We get the Hall of Fame game on Thursday, and just super stoked. So yeah, let's get into the first player here before I blabber on too long. So starting things off with the lone quarterback I put on this list, it's going to be Anthony Richardson, and you can call me basic for it, but it would just be wrong to make a league winners list without talking about Anthony Richardson. I thought about discussing a guy like Jaden Daniels, but I don't think he has the same upside that Anthony Richardson does, and the reality here is that the Colts are going to be near the top of the NFL in terms of plays per game. That gives you just more opportunities for the guys in this offense to produce fantasy points. And they've been really adamant this offseason about not wanting to limit Anthony Richardson's rushing ability. And they even quoted themselves saying, would you stop letting Steph Curry shoot threes? Basically saying that Anthony Richardson is elite because of what he does on the ground as a rusher as well as through the air. And they're not going to stop doing that. So really what it's going to come down to is just, can Anthony Richardson stay healthy? On top of that, they've got really elite receivers as well. They've got Michael Pittman Jr., who's a year-in, year-out Pro Bowler. They added A.D. Mitchell this offseason, a second-round rookie. Josh Downs showed last year that he can be a legitimate difference maker for the roster. They're going to get Jelani Woods back this season. They've obviously got the return of Jonathan Taylor again. This is going to be a really good offense, and they've got a really good offensive line as well. Anthony Richardson's got a shot to potentially lead the NFL in rushing yards at the quarterback position. 10-plus touchdowns is a very real possibility for this guy. I wouldn't be shocked at all if he flirted with the 15 rushing touchdowns we saw out of Jalen Hurts and Josh Allen last season. Obviously, we can't project him for that, but it's in the cards for this guy, and I think the fact of the matter is, if he stays healthy, Anthony Richardson's probably going to finish as the quarterback 1, and right now he goes as the quarterback 6 off boards, being like drafted in the mid-5th round. I think that's really right. I think if he actually does stay healthy and finishes the season as the quarterback 1, he's going to be a guy that you'll look back on this season and think of him as the reason your team won your fantasy championship. I think he's got it in him to put up a season similar to like what Newton put up in 2015. The kinds of seasons where the quarterback alone actually is the reason why your fantasy team was so elite, and those are really rare actually, but Richardson's one of the few quarterbacks with the athletic profile to potentially put up one of those seasons, and I would be really upset with myself if I went into the season without any exposure to Richardson. He's definitely a guy that's got a ton of upside and could legitimately be a league winner for us this season. Next up, we've got Devonta Anan, who I've talked a little bit about how I think his value is just a little bit too high right now. I think people are drafting him really early, but more and more I look at him, the more I just sort of come around to it, just because the upside's so insane here. He's the first player in 90 years to average over 7 yards per carry on 100-plus carries in the season. The kind of season we saw Devonta Anan put up last season is not something that happens on a regular basis. This is a freak athlete, an extremely talented NFL player. I don't care that the offense was really amazing. I don't care that the situation's fantastic. There have been a lot of players in really great situations before that haven't succeeded, and Devonta Anan absolutely took the opportunity he had last year and absolutely ran with it. On top of that, the Dolphins this season have the single easiest strength of schedule for the running back position in the entire NFL. Not that this offense needed any help putting up a ton of numbers. They already led the NFL in total touchdowns and yardage last season. But they've got a real opportunity to do it again, and this backfield is certainly going to be a huge part of that. And even more, there's a lot of rumors this offseason that Devon Achan's really looked to integrate himself as a pass catcher. They're working him out of the slot some, and I think it makes a lot of sense. This Dolphins team doesn't really have a clear third wide receiver. They've got Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle, and then you're looking at Odell Beckham Jr. as their third wide receiver. I think we could see some potential snap share here where we've got Devon Achan in as a slot, along with Raheem Mostert in the backfield. They're going to be super creative with this offense. They've obviously got a ton of weapons, and they're going to want to get the ball in the hands of all these players. And Devon Achan is going to be a guy they're going to want to make a focal point of this offense. And he was actually utilized inside the 20-yard line a lot more than you might remember last season. They got really creative with end around, some of those little underhand flip passes to him. They didn't necessarily just turn around and hand it to him at the goal line like they will for Raheem Mostert, but he wasn't the guy that necessarily just came off the field every time they got in close. So he's got some legitimate touchdown upside here as well. And I think even beyond that, I think we just have to understand that this offense is extremely elite. We saw that they supported Raheem Mostert to a 21 total touchdown season last year, and if Devon Achan can see 15 touches a game and continue that level of efficiency, there are going to be weeks this season where he puts up 30, 40 fantasy points and ends up just dominating, and he's the reason you won those weeks. And if you can string together a couple of those over the course of the season, you're going to look back at this as being like a really historic year for the guy. The real only concern here is just going to be injury risk. We know he's a smaller back, but the good news is that it does sound like he's put on a little bit of weight this offseason that should help him in terms of his ability to stay on the field. And if he ends up playing 17 games, let's just even say he plays 14 games this season, I would be shocked to see him finish outside the top 5 of the position. I'm super excited about the upside here. It's going to be really fun to watch this guy play, and I think he really has all the tools necessary to be a guy that you're going to look back on and say that he is the reason why you won your championship this year. Next up, we've got Kiron Williams, who was the RB2 in points per game last season. Nobody else was even close. You had Christian McCaffrey averaging just over 24 fantasy points per game, Kiron Williams averaging just over 21, and then Alvin Kamara was third, averaging just under 18 fantasy points per game. So Kiron really did lap the field outside of Christian McCaffrey last season, and even beyond that, he averaged 24.9 fantasy points per game in games where he saw less than 80% of the snaps. That's relevant to me because I think a lot of people are really worried that Blake Corum is going to come in and take away the elite workhorse role we saw Kiron in, where he was seeing like 90, 93% of the snaps for this team. And I think that's true. I think we're going to see Kiron with like a 75%, maybe 80% snap share on this team. And the fact of the matter is, we saw him in that sample size last season. It was 5 games. He put together an average of just under 25 fantasy points per game over that 5-game stretch. So that's a pretty solid sample. And that would have been good for the running back 1 in fantasy last season. Like I said, Christian McCaffrey finished at 24.5 points per game. And what this shows really is just that Kiron is plenty talented enough, and this offense in Los Angeles is plenty good enough to support Kiron being an elite NFL running back and an elite fantasy back for us, even if he doesn't have a 90% snap share. This is the team that's going to score a ton. The defense is only going to be worse than it was last season. They were one of the worst defensive units in the NFL last year, and we saw Aaron Donald retire this offseason, so that's going to leave a huge hole for the Rams if they're going to want to win games. I think they will win a decent number of games because this offense is really good. Sean McVay's an elite offensive play caller. Matthew Stafford's a good quarterback. They've obviously got great receivers in Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. This is going to be a team that's going to get in a lot of shootouts this season, and Kiron's going to be a massive part of that. He's also heavily involved as a pass catcher. He's not going to come out of the game just because of game script. And more and more reports out of training camp are just that Blake Corum's clearly the backup. They brought him in to spell Kiron because they didn't like using him 90+% of the time last year, and that makes sense. There aren't any running backs in the NFL that see that kind of workload. Kiron has dealt with some injury issues over the past couple of years, and especially last season when they're giving him that kind of workload, it's just really tough for anybody to stay healthy with that. So it made a lot of sense to them to grab another running back, but I think there's a really clear argument to be made that even with that slightly reduced snap share, we could very easily see Kiron Williams finish as the running back 2 again this season, maybe running back 1 even. We saw that 25 point per game sample in those 5 games where he didn't have that 80% snap share. And I think there's a reasonable argument to be made that he should be the number 2 running back off of boards. He's currently being drafted as the running back 7 behind guys like Jonathan Taylor, behind Jahmyr Gibbs, behind obviously Breece Hall, behind Bijan. I think there's a case to be made for him being drafted ahead of all of those guys, and being drafted as the RB7 right now for a guy that could legitimately be the running back 1 and potentially even lap the field at that is something that I don't want to pass up. So I'm super excited about Kiron this season. I do want to draft a ton of him, and also if you want to just hedge your bets a little bit, it's super easy. You just draft Blake Corum later on, and if that injury does strike with Kiron, at least you've got the handcuff there. You're probably going to still have a top 10 back even in that case as well. So I think it's one of the best situations to find yourselves in. Draft Kiron in round 2 and then take Corum late, and you're going to be really set with your running back spot this year. The final running back on this list is going to be Alvin Kamara, who was the running back 3 in fantasy points per game just last season. On top of that, Kendre Miller continues to be injured. There was a quote last week from Dennis Allen, their head coach, saying that it's hard to make the team from the training room, referring to Kendre Miller, who's dealing with another hamstring injury. He's clearly frustrated about Kendre Miller's inability to stay on the field. We saw him be injured for pretty much the majority of his rookie season. On top of that, the only other competition for backfield touches here in this offense is Jamal Williams, who looked absolutely awful last season. You've got Taysom Hill there, who's going to steal a couple of touchdowns here and there, but he's not going to be a guy that's going to be featured in this backfield. It's going to be Alvin Kamara out of the backfield, and on top of that, this is going to be a much more modern offense. Reports out of training camp are that Kubiak is bringing a much more modern, motion-friendly system that's going to really elevate this entire offense, in my opinion. We're going to see a lot more scoring opportunities. On top of that, the offensive line play, it's not going to be good. They just saw Ramchak go down for the entire season due to injury. They're an aging offensive line. This is going to be a year where they're probably going to struggle from an offensive line standpoint, and that's actually kind of good for Alvin Kamara because he was not efficient as a runner last year anyway. That's not what we're drafting him for. We're drafting him to be a guy who's going to catch a ton of passes and score some touchdowns, and Alvin Kamara is a guy who's going to see a lot of dump downs from Derek Carr, especially if there's a lot of pressure in his face, and I think that a top 5 finish is legitimately possible for Kamara here. He's currently being drafted as running back 16 off boards, and like I said, he finished the RB3 in points per game last season. There's no real competition for touches in this offense. He also only finished with 6 touchdowns last season. We've seen him as a guy who can put up massive touchdown seasons. We saw him put up a 5-touchdown game before. We've seen him with seasons of 18, 21 touchdowns over the courses of his career. If this offense hits, if this offense is good, a really high-end production season for him is absolutely in the range of outcomes. And I mean, in all reality, the running back 1 is within his range of outcomes, and being able to find that as the running back 16, that's just way too good to pass up. If he's available for me in the 4th, 5th round, he's absolutely someone that I'm targeting because I do think he could be a guy that is just it's just name fatigue here. I don't think people want to draft Kamara because he's been around, that he's been here, done that, and people understand that he is obviously not the same player that he was. I don't think he's the same explosive back that he was earlier on in his career, but he's still a really talented pass catcher. There's plenty of opportunity here in this offense, and I think that Kamara is a good enough player to be a meaningful contributor for us this season, and if things break right in the touchdown department, I think that top 3 is very easily in his range of outcomes, and like I said, running 1 overall is technically still a possibility for this guy. Moving on to the first wide receiver I want to highlight on this list, and that's going to be A.J. Brown, who was the wide receiver 5 last season despite a really disappointing second half. If you look at the first half of last season, this is a guy that was trending towards being the offensive player of the year. He had a stretch where he broke the NFL record for consecutive games with 125-plus receiving yards, and I think that a lot of people are just sort of forgetting how dominant he was because of how brutal the back half of the season was for Brown and this entire Eagles offense. We saw Jalen Hurts deal with a litany of injuries. Was bothering him. Jalen Hurts was clearly not himself. It was just really tough for this offense to put up a lot of numbers over that back half of the season, but the good news is that Jalen Hurts is reportedly fully healthy. They brought in a new offensive coordinator in Kellen Moore, who has been a really great option for the number 1 wide receiver in his offenses over the past couple of years. We can look at CeeDee Lamb 2 years ago, Keenan Allen finishing as the wide receiver 3 in fantasy points per game just last season with Kellen Moore at the helm. If they do give A.J. Brown that clear slot role in this offense, a guy they're going to move all over the field, which it makes a lot of sense for them to do because Brown is just their best player. If they focus on getting A.J. Brown the ball, I think there's a real opportunity here for A.J. Brown to flirt with a potential number 1 finish at the position. He could easily be the wide receiver 1 overall here, and I think he really does belong in tier 2 at the wide receiver position with the guys like Jamar Chase, Justin Jefferson, Amon-Ra St. Brown. If you want to rank him as high as your wide receiver 3, I think that's totally okay, and I'm really excited to see what A.J. Brown's going to do in this offense. He's got a ton of touchdown upside, definitely more than some of these smaller guys like Amon-Ra. I don't think Amon-Ra's got 15 touchdown upside, but we could certainly see A.J. Brown put up a 15 touchdown season. A.J. Brown is going to have some week-winning performances. He's got 200-yard game ceilings in his range of outcomes. He's a guy that I want on my roster, and he's someone that I really do think has it in him to potentially be a game-breaking wide receiver for us in fantasy. And if this offense can click for Philadelphia, it could be a really exciting season for us. And on top of that, the Eagles' defense is not going to be as good as it was over the last couple of years. They were trending the wrong way last year as well. This is going to be a team that's going to need to win games with their offense, and that's what we want to see out of the players we're drafting this high. We don't want them to be so good that they're not scoring in the second half of games. We want them to be finding themselves in shootouts, finding themselves winning games 35-28, where A.J. Brown can have 180 yards and 2 touchdowns. And I think those games are going to happen a couple times this season, and that's going to be really great for us as A.J. Brown managers this year. Next up, we've got Chris Olave, and I really hope I'm right this year on this one because I did potentially burn some of you guys last year. I'll apologize for that. He didn't quite pan out the way I thought he would, although he wasn't necessarily bad last season, finishing as the wide receiver 19 in points per game. The issue is just things didn't quite click. He never really put together one of those blow-up performances where he really won in your week. He was just good every single week, and that certainly wasn't what we drafted him to be. So there's obviously room for him to grow this year, and I think there's a lot of reasons for optimism. Like I mentioned earlier, we're going to see a lot more motion in this offense. If you look at Chris Olave's numbers with on plays with pre-snap motion versus without, he's about 40% better on plays with pre-snap motion. So that alone is really great to see. We do expect Chris Olave to be a guy they're going to be moving all over the field, and he's talked a lot this offseason about how he feels a lot more comfortable in this offense, like it's going to fit his skill set, and it's going to be really great to see just him and Rashid Shaheed out there on the side. This is going to be a team that probably runs a lot of two wide receiver sets, and the good thing about two wide receiver sets when you're one of those two wide receivers is that the targets are going to go to you or the other guy, and Chris Olave is clearly the guy they want to get the ball to. On top of this is going to be a team that, in part due to the fact that their offensive line is going to struggle, they're going to run a lot of play action. It's going to help take the pressure off the offensive line, and when they do that, it's going to open up a lot of big play opportunity for Olave. We know Olave is a guy who can be a really elite threat. He finished 6th in the NFL in air yards last season. This is a guy who they want to use down the field. He's an elite player. There are going to be several games this season where he catches 1 or 2 50-yard passes and finishes with 100, 150 yards and a touchdown. This is going to be a guy who legitimately has it in him to finish with 1,500 yards and double-digit touchdowns over the course of the year. And I think this could be the season. I think that Derek Carr is obviously not an elite quarterback by any means, but he's good enough to put up those counting stats. This is a team that's going to be better on offense than I think a lot of people think, and the defense is going to be continuously getting worse. This is a team who sort of has kicked the can down the road, metaphorically speaking, in terms of their salary cap. They don't have the same pieces on defense that they've had in the past. This isn't going to be a very competitive defense, and I think they're probably not going to be a fantastic team overall, but for fantasy, there's going to be a lot of opportunity for this team to play catch up, for Derek Carr to really air it out to both Shaheed and Chris Olave, and there's going to be a lot of opportunity here for Olave, and I think this will be the year where Chris Olave finds his way into the top 10 at the position, and he might even just flirt with the top 5 here. Moving on to the last wide receiver on this list, we're going to talk about Christian Watson, who's going much later than some of the guys we talked about a little bit earlier. And the thing with Christian Watson is there's really just no denying the talent or the opportunity here. This is a guy who in his rookie season just 2 years ago, we really saw burst onto the scene and put together a 4-game stretch that made us really think he could be one of the budding stars at the wide receiver position in the NFL. On top of that, he now finds himself in an offense with Jordan Love at the helm, one of the highest paid quarterbacks in the NFL now, who it's an offense where we really do expect him to be a top 5 to 10 offense this year with Matt LaFleur at the helm. This elite wide receiver core in general, there's a lot of really great bodies around them. They don't have an elite running game. They're going to be a team that they're going to win by throwing the ball, and Jordan Love showed that he can really do that. And on top of that, Christian Watson's got really more upside than anybody else in this wide receiver room, and he's drafted several rounds later than Jaden Reed, who goes in the 5th or 6th round. And I really like Jaden Reed. I think he's a really talented player, but the upside here for Christian Watson is just simply a lot higher than Reed. Watson is a guy who's got double-digit touchdown upside. We saw him finish with 7 touchdowns as a rookie, just 5 touchdowns last year in limited playing time. If he can stay healthy, a 1,200-yard season with 10 touchdowns is absolutely in the range of outcomes for a guy who we do expect to be utilized really downfield primarily. He finished 6th in the NFL in average depth of target last season. That's absolutely fantastic. We want to see those high-value targets towards our receivers, and being able to be targeted at an over 20% target rate while being targeted that far downfield is going to result in a very high ceiling for a player of this talent level. And if things can click for him, if he can stay healthy, which it sounds like he's worked on this offseason, they identified a unbalance between his left and right leg that should allow him to hopefully avoid the hamstring injuries that have been hampering him so far. If he can manage to stay healthy for 17 games, I think he's got top 10 upside at the position. I'd be shocked if he finishes outside of the top 24 if he plays all 17 games. And the reality is he's just absolutely worth the gamble right now. He's the wide receiver 43 off boards going in the 9th round. And if he doesn't hit, you don't really care because you weren't drafting him to start. But if he does hit, he's a guy that could be a massive difference maker for us. He's just the kind of gamble that I want to be taking at that point in the draft. So I want to get a lot of Christian Watson this year. I don't mind taking Jaden Reed either, but I think Watson's clearly the guy that can be a league winner for us. And he's someone that I really do want to get on as many rosters as possible because if he hits, he's really going to be a fun ride to have on your roster this year. And lastly, we're going to move on to the tight end position here. So we'll start things off with Kyle Pitts. And I really don't love talking about Kyle Pitts because the tough thing with it is that I don't honestly know if it's going to happen for him this season. But it would have just been malpractice to not talk about Kyle Pitts when we talk about some league-winning tight ends here. He's got the talent to put up a dominant season. We saw him put up over 1,000 yards as a rookie. obviously struggled lately or with just injury last season, bad quarterback play, and there's a lot of reasons to be pessimistic and down on what Kyle Pitts has done so far in his career, but we've got to remember that he's still extremely young. Kirk Cousins is the new quarterback in Atlanta, and he just supported TJ Hawkinson en route to a tight end 2 point per game finish in 2023. I know he missed a lot of time, as did Kirk Cousins, but while both were playing together, Kirk Cousins did support high-end production for his tight end, and Cousins is a guy that hyper-targets his best players, and there really isn't a clear third target in this offense. You've got Darnell Mooney behind Drake London and Kyle Pitts. He's not going to be a target hog in this offense. Bijan Robinson will be targeted out of the backfield some as well, but if this ends up being a high-octane, high-paced offense where we see Kyle Pitts with a 23-24% target share get hyper-targeted near the red zone, we could see Kyle Pitts be a guy that potentially flirts with double-digit touchdowns and 1,000 yards. And if both Kyle Pitts and Kirk Cousins can be at the top of their game, which is obviously a lot of ifs, we need Kyle Pitts to just look better than he did last season. He didn't look fully healthy last year, didn't look like the same elite tight end that I think we were expecting to see. And on top of that, Kirk Cousins obviously coming off of a major injury, so there's a lot of question marks here, but if things can line up, I don't think it's necessarily crazy at all to say that Kyle Pitts could be the tight end 1 this year. He's got the talent to do it. I think it's going to happen for Kyle Pitts at some point in his career. So I guess if not this year, when? So this is a great year to try it. He's currently being drafted as the tight end 7, going right after George Kittle. So if you want to take that flyer on him, I think you certainly can. It's definitely a dart throw pick. I won't feel super comfortable with it. I think he's not going to be a guy that I'm going to feel confident in week 1. But the ceiling is there, and I totally get making the draft pick because he really could be a guy that just wins your league this year. And the last player we're going to talk about here is going to be Mark Andrews. And it should come as no surprise to you guys when I say that Mark Andrews can finish as the tight end 1 this year. And that's because he did it in 2021. He's just 2 years removed from that. And on top of that, he's been a top 5 tight end in points per game each of the last 5 seasons. So we know Mark Andrews, when he's on the field, he's the number 1 target for an offense led by a 2-time MVP at the quarterback position. There's not a lot more to ask for there. He's going to be a guy that they're going to feature in the offense. He's a really talented player. He's not old. I believe he's 29 right now, so much younger than guys like Travis Kelce, who's 34. There's plenty of tread left on these Mark Andrews tires for him to continue to be an elite performer in the NFL, and it's really just going to come down to whether or not he can stay healthy. But he's currently being drafted as a tight end 3, going just over 2 full rounds later than Travis Kelce and Sam Laporta. So I love the value there compared to those two. I think he's got just as good a shot as those guys as finishing as the tight end 1 this season. And if he can just stay healthy, which is admittedly a big if the way he's gone the last couple seasons, I think a top 3 finish is almost certainly in the cards for him. And tight end 1 is absolutely a possibility for a guy that we saw put up double-digit touchdown season with 1,300 receiving yards just 3 seasons ago. So I'm super excited. Anytime I get Mark Andrews, he's a guy that I'm super stoked to get on my roster, and he's someone that I really do find myself targeting this season. That'll do it for the 9 league-winning players that you guys can draft this season that could potentially be guys that really do win your league. Up next, I'll begin over some players that I think are going to present really good values to us this season. Keep in mind as well that on August 1st, so I guess that'll be when you guys watch the next video, I will be releasing my draft kit to my website. That'll be completely free for you guys. Just wanted to get one out. I've never made one for you guys before, and it's something some of you guys have asked for before, so I think it'd be super cool. It's already 13 pages long. It's only getting longer. I'm going to release my projections and rankings will still be there as well. So please do give that a read. Give me any tips as well. I'm open to any positive or negative feedback. Just trying to get better with all this. So hopefully you guys enjoyed that, and hopefully that's helpful for you guys as well. You just got to go to my website. It'll be free. I'll link that in the description as well. Beyond that as well, there will be 4 videos each of every single week, really, up until the first week of the NFL season. Probably even more than that during the regular season. We're going to keep pumping out content, keep being here all off season long to help you guys dominate your drafts, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're almost into August. We got the Hall of Fame game on Thursday. Lots to be excited about. And if you want to make sure that you don't miss anything, just make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you like this video, give it a thumbs up if you made it this far. It really helps the algorithm and helps know that I'm doing a good job. And yeah, just super stoked. We got a lot of stuff coming. It's going to be a lot of fun. And I'm just really excited for this ride this year. So appreciate you guys, and I'll catch you with the next one. Peace. Thank you guys for watching. If you haven't already, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, like the video, check out these other videos here if you haven't. If you want more content, please feel free to follow me on Twitter at RealSteelFFB. I'll be more active on there as the season goes on. Thanks. Catch you later.